Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Stephanie and I appreciate y'all stopping by. Today I'll be showing y'all how I made these 4 easy watermelon themed DIYs that are perfect for summer. I also have a bonus watermelon sorbet recipe at the end of this video that you don't want to miss. I hope y'all enjoy the video, and if you do, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Let's get started with DIY number 1. For this project, I used one of these 12 by 12 screen art canvases that I picked up on clearance at Hobby Lobby for 90 cents. I started by flipping the canvas over and carefully removed all the staples using a flathead screwdriver and some pliers so that I could easily remove the screen from the frame. Next, I took one of these Farm Fresh calendars from Dollar Tree and tore out the page with the watermelon slices. Then I placed the frame over the calendar page and centered it so that the words could easily be read and the hole at the top of the page was covered by the frame. To finish up this quick little project, I flipped the frame and calendar page over and replaced the screen using staples to reattach it to the back of the frame. This is going to help hold the calendar page in place. I did periodically flip the frame back over to make sure no staples were showing and that the picture was still centered. And that's it for this one. I love how it turned out. It's simple, but I love it. Quickly moving on to DIY number 2. For this next project, I used one green, one white, and one red unscented candle, and one of the daiquiri glasses, all from Dollar Tree. I also used some watermelon scented candle fragrance that I picked up at Hobby Lobby. I started by removing the plastic label wrapper from the green candle and placed it in a pot of water on the stove on medium to low heat and allowed it to slowly melt. Once the wax was completely melted, I carefully removed it from the pot of hot water and placed it on a pot holder. I then fished out the wick using a skewer. Once I had the wick out of the old candle, I used some hot glue to temporarily attach the wick to the inside of the bottom of the daiquiri glass and used a skewer stick to hold it in the center of the glass while pouring the wax. Next, using an oven mitt, I carefully poured the wax into the glass until it was about 1 inch or so from the bottom. I then added several drops of the watermelon fragrance to the wax and set it aside to fully solidify, which only took about 30 to 45 minutes. I did clean up any of the excess wax that got on the side of the glass with a paper towel once. I then repeated the steps using the white candle. This time I added only about 1/4 inch of the wax to the glass. I also added several drops of the fragrance to this layer as well, and then set it aside for 30 to 45 minutes to fully solidify. Finally, I repeated the same steps with the red candle. I melted it, and this time I carefully poured all of the wax into the glass and added several more drops of the fragrance oil. This time I set the glass aside for about 2 hours to give this last layer of wax plenty of time to completely solidify. Here you can see that the middle of the candle sunk in a bit, so to fix this I used a heat tool and remelted a little bit of the wax that was on top to fill in the hole and set it aside for a few minutes to re-solidify. Then to finish off this candle, once the wax was completely solid, I trimmed down the wick and now I have this adorable watermelon daiquiri candle. I'm really happy with the way this candle turned out. I think it's adorable and it smells amazing. I want to take a quick second to mention that today's video is part of the Sweet Summer Days Challenge hosted by Brenda at Rustic and Lace DIY, Amanda at 6 Kids and a Glue Gun, and Chantel at Crafty Hints. If y'all haven't checked out these channels, y'all are missing out. They are absolutely amazing. I'll link their channels below in the description box, as well as a link to the playlist for today's challenge so y'all can get even more summer decor inspiration along with some sweet treats that y'all don't want to miss. Let's go ahead and move on to DIY number 3. For this project, I used 1.5 packages of these 4.5 inch styrofoam circles from Dollar Tree. First, I took an angle ruler from Dollar Tree and placed it on one of the circles so that I could trace out a V shape to get the shape of a watermelon slice. Once I had the shape traced out, I took a pair of scissors and cut off the excess pieces of styrofoam and cleaned up the edges. You can use a knife or something else to cut the styrofoam, but I found these scissors worked great. After I had the shape cut out, I then traced it onto the other 2 styrofoam circles and cut them out so that I would have 3 slices of watermelon. When I had all 3 slices cut out, I took some apple barrel paint in the color New Shamrock and painted the round side of the slices to represent the outside of a watermelon. I did end up doing 2 coats of the paint and also made sure to paint the sides with a small line as well. I repeated this step on the other 2 slices. Next, I used apple barrel paint in the color Spring Green to paint a small section of the slice right up against the dark green. Again, I used 2 coats of the paint and painted the sides with the same thickness as on top. I then repeated this on the other 2 slices. Next, I used Ceramic Coat paint in the color White to paint a smaller line across the slice right up against the light green color. This time I only needed 1 coat of paint since the slice was already white. I did go ahead and paint a small line on each side the same thickness as the line on top. Once again, I repeated this on the other 2 slices. For the largest part of the slice, I used Ceramic Coat paint in the color Watermelon and painted the remainder of the slice right up against the white line and along both sides. Here I did end up going ahead and using 2 coats of the paint so that it would have a full coverage. I repeated this step on the other 2 slices and set them aside to completely dry. Once the slices were good and dry, I used apple barrel paint in the color Black and a small paintbrush to paint 3 seeds on each of the slices. I will admit drawing watermelon seeds is not a specialty of mine, but since they're all a little different in nature, I am so happy with how these 3 slices of watermelon turned out. They would be perfect as a bowl filler or on a fun summer tiered tray. Moving on to DIY number 4. For this next project, I used 1 4.3-inch clay pot, 1 2.6-inch clay pot, 1 2.3-inch clay pot, and 1 1.6-inch clay pot, all from Hobby Lobby. I started by giving all 4 pots 1 coat of Waverly chalk paint in the color White. Once that was dry, I took apple barrel paint in the color New Shamrock and a makeup sponge that I picked up at Dollar Tree and sponged the paint around the rim of the large pot. I did not worry too much about getting a full coverage because I was okay with some of the white showing through so that it would look a little more organic. I then repeated this step on the other 3 clay pots. Next, I took some apple barrel paint in the color Spring Green and a new makeup sponge and lightly sponged over the dark green to give it a little more texture and to make it look a little more natural. I alternated between the Shamrock and Spring Green colors until I was happy with the way it looked. Then I took the smaller end of the makeup sponge and using just the Spring Green paint, I went around the pot just a little bit above the lip. I repeated these steps on the other 3 pots. To cover up the remaining part of the pot, I used Ceramic Coat paint in the color Watermelon and a makeup sponge. Again, I only used 1 coat and was not worried about getting it completely covered and was okay with some of the white showing through. I then repeated this step on the other 3 pots. I used apple barrel paint in the color Real Red and a new makeup sponge to give a little more texture to the watermelon colored paint. I did not use a full coverage with the red, I just hit a few areas where I thought it needed a little more dimension. I alternated between the watermelon paint and the red paint until I was happy with the way it looked. Then I repeated this step on the other pots. Once the paint was dry, I used some white paint and a thinner side of the makeup sponge and went around the pot where the red and green paint came together to kind of break up the 2 colors and add a little something extra. I then repeated this step with the other 3 pots. Then to add the final touches to these pots, I took a black marker and drew a few watermelon seeds onto each one. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I am not an expert watermelon seed artist, but I think they turned out okay. Next, I used a large wood bead from Amazon and painted it with 1 coat of the watermelon paint. To assemble the wind chime, I used some white cotton twine and an upholstery needle. I started by tying a knot in the end of the twine and placing the wood bead onto the twine and using some hot glue to hold it in place. I cut off the excess twine and used some more hot glue to seal the bottom of the bead. I also used 3 more medium wooden beads and another large wooden bead, all from Amazon. Next, I put one of the medium-sized beads onto the twine and then placed the smallest pot down on top of the bead. This is where the upholstery needle comes in handy to help thread the twine through these pots. I decided how much distance I wanted between the large wood bead and the small pot and used hot glue to attach the medium bead to the inside of the pot. When I was happy with the distance between the pot and the large bead, I took some hot glue and sealed up the hole in the wood bead so that the pot would not slide down any further. I then repeated these steps with another medium bead and the next sized pot. Again, I decided how much space I wanted between the 2 pots and used hot glue to secure the bead and twine in place. Next, I placed the last medium-sized bead onto the twine and placed the next sized pot on top, spacing it out like the previous 2 pots, and used hot glue to secure the bead and twine into place. Finally, I placed the large bead onto the twine, followed by the largest pot. When I was happy with the distance between the large pot and the smaller pot, I used a generous amount of hot glue to attach the large bead to the inside of the pot and then to secure the twine coming out of the bottom of the bead. For the largest pot, I did go back in once the glue had set up and reinforced around the top bead with even more glue. I used Gorilla Hot Glue for this project, but if you wanted a stronger adhesive here, you could use it for a little added security. Once I had all the pots in place, I cut off the excess twine and made a loop for a hanger. I triple knotted the twine right where it comes out of the top of the pot and then used some hot glue for a little extra security, and this one's done. I think this one turned out absolutely adorable and I love it hanging on the porch. I will probably go ahead and get a bell to put on it soon so that it makes a little more noise when the wind blows. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have a little treat for y'all. I wanted to share this quick and easy watermelon sorbet recipe that is delicious and a huge hit with my 14-year-old. For this recipe, I used a seedless watermelon and cut it up into cubes. I placed 8 cups of the watermelon into a food processor and pureed it on high until it was almost a juice-like texture. I did end up having to do this in small batches. If you don't have a food processor, you could also use a blender. Once I had all 8 cups pureed, I placed it in a large Tupperware container and set it aside. To make the simple syrup, I placed 1 cup of water and 1 cup of sugar into a pot on medium-high heat until it was boiling and all the sugar had dissolved. Then I set it off the heat to cool down. When the sugar was cool, I mixed 2 tablespoons of lemon juice and the syrup into the pureed watermelon and mixed it up. Then I placed the lid on top and put it in the freezer for a couple of hours until it was firm. Once the mixture was frozen, I placed it back in the food processor and pureed it on high until it was the texture of a thick slushy and placed it into a large bowl. I did end up having to do this in small batches. Then, to finish off this sweet treat, I took some mini semi-sweet chocolate chips and folded them into the sorbet to act as the watermelon seeds. All that's left is to serve this up and enjoy. My whole house loves this recipe, and I hope y'all will too. My 14-year-old gives this his stamp of approval. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite sweet treat is during the summer. Mine is watermelon. Could you have ever guessed? Here's one final look at all of today's watermelon-themed DIYs. I absolutely love how these projects turned out. They were all so fun and easy to make, not to mention the sorbet was delicious. Which one of these projects is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. I don't think I can pick a favorite on this one. I love them all, but the sorbet was perfect. I want to thank each and every one of y'all for stopping by, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help me out here on YouTube, and if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, what are you waiting for? Click that button and stick around. I have a bunch of fun projects on the way. Please don't forget to go check out the host of today's challenge linked in the description box below, as well as check out the playlist for even more sweet treats and summer decor inspiration. I'll see y'all next time.